Hi, friends. This episode of Big Blue Banter is brought to you by Prize Picks. Head on over to Prize Picks and use promo code BANTER, and they'll match up to $100 on a new deposit. Thank you and enjoy.
Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter, New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier, joined as always my co-host Nick Filato. And today we've got a special guest on the show. And as those know, and as I've seen in the comments section, nobody gets more excited about talking quarterbacks than me. It's the position I love to talk about. So we've got a great guest in today to talk quarterbacks, and Sean McEvoy of QB Takeover. You can find his work and you can find his what QB Takeover is at qbtakeover.com. He's a quarterback coach and trainer. He knows a lot about the quarterback position, so we're excited to get his insights today. Sean, how are you doing?
Fellas, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me. And just like you, always excited to talk quarterbacks and quarterback play. And then when you got the draft coming up, it's even a super special time. And then when you're a Giants fan, right, then it's even more like quarterback centric and maybe what the future looks like. So happy to be here, and thanks for having me.
All right, Sean, I want to start with a broad question, and I know there's going to be like a lot of context kind of left out of this question because these kind of things are so specific to the offense that a lot of quarterbacks operate within. How much of a quarterback sees the field and processes post-snap can be learned, or how much of that is innate?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think it's all learned, right? Like, I don't think we're born with this ability to see open space on the field or an understanding of how to work through concepts as a QB. So I think it's all learned. I think the real question is, how much can be learned at a later stage, or how much, can be learned once a quarterback gets to the NFL, right? And I think that's really where the crux of the issue comes down to. For example, quarterbacks that are more exposed to a pro style offense, that have offensive coordinators that, at the college level, that have them work through full field concepts, and, are used to going from 1 to 2 to 3, and then maybe face defenses that are going to show a bunch of different looks, then those are the guys that come to the NFL with a greater ability to do that early. Whereas if you have guys that are more of a wide open kind of QB centric, maybe RPO system, maybe a kind of a one read and run type of QB, if they have that ability, those are the guys you'll see get to the NFL and have to a little bit more catching up to do from a standpoint of being able to work through a whole progression. So I think it's certainly all learned. It's just kind of how quickly can you learn it? How early do you get exposed to it? And then if you're a guy who's limited with that ability, once you get to the NFL, it's a tough place to play catch up.
That's a great answer, Sean. We've asked that question to every quarterback coach and former quarterback we've had on the show, and the answers have varied, which has been really interesting. And I think what makes it such a difficult thing to really understand as we project the NFL level, because a lot of people, we do film work on these QBs, and they're like, let us know who are the best processors, because, throughout the Giants' last 5 years, they've had issues with processing at the quarterback position. Let's be blunt about it. And we always say, like, it's very hard to project because for a lot of reasons, the college game is so different. We don't know exactly what's on the plate of these quarterbacks at college, and a lot of that will change both pre and post snap. So I find it interesting, though, to see that there are quarterbacks who are really good at studying the game and from that standpoint, but then when they get to the actual game and the bullets are flying, it's not what you would expect based on the work they put in. What do you make of that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a real thing. I think there's guys that, I mean, not just in football, but like in anything we all do, there's guys that perform better under pressure than others, right? There's people that know all the stuff, and then they get up in front of a crowd and they can't get sentences together, right? Like, from a public speaking standpoint, I equate a lot of it to that, like the ability to not break down under pressure. There's the old Navy SEALs training about, like, we don't rise to the occasion, we sink to the level of our training, right? You've heard that. It's something we use in the coaching world and the quarterback training world. Like, we're trying on the field to rep these things and get so good at them that when the bullets are flying, we still maintain a high level. So that's a real part of this. That is the part that I do think is innate. Some guys handle pressure better, some don't. And I think you can get better at it the more you're exposed to it. So that's why I think you'll see an affinity from some head coaches and owners and GMs about a quarterback who has a lot of experience at the college level, right? Give me the guy who's been a 4-year starter, who's, like the Bo Nix of this draft class, because he's seen so much, and maybe that helps him handle the bullets better. And then the second piece of that is some guys have ways to work through pressure better. So guys that really have solid pocket presence, maybe have a dual threat ability to create when things break down. Those are guys that maybe they don't handle the pressure outright better. They just have more solutions to go to. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I think you find that as well. But I think you look at it in pieces. It's what are the pieces of it you can train, and that's things like how to see open space in the field, how to read hip angles of defenders and things of that nature, to understand what may happen post snap, what space might get closed post snap. That there's techniques and training you can do to be better at that. And then you mentioned there's the film, the watching of film, or the years of experience. Is why Tom Brady was so elite. One, because he studied film. Him and Peyton Manning are these guys that like unworldly with that ability and the work they put in. But then it was also so many years. When they got later in the NFL, they were maybe at their best. That combination of seeing the film and the experience, you kind of feel like you know what's coming. And then that third piece, I think, is the what ability do I have when things break down to handle things that maybe I wasn't prepared for.
It's an excellent answer, and I think that really gives us a lot of insight into this, and it's something that we're going to continue to ask everybody who comes on the show, who plays the quarterback position or coaches it, because it just seems to be the biggest thing to me when evaluating these quarterbacks, and it's hard to project, but we have
Hardest
other
thing to
traits.
project for sure. Hardest thing to project for sure.
And yet it matters so much.
Because you brought up something interesting about Bo Nix. Now,
Yeah.
Bo Nix, he's Van Wilder is what I call him. He's been there forever, right?
For sure.
So-
him and Sam Hartman this year, right? Like,
Yeah,
guys
him and
that
Sam.
played forever.
They're just playing forever. And I look at the Mitchell Trubisky's of the world and the Trey Lances of the world. Now, both of those guys right now have not worked out, but
Yeah.
both of them came into the NFL draft with limited games started. And I know Bill
Yeah.
Parcells used to really put a high priority on players who played through their senior season. Like, he really appreciated that. So from a quarterback standpoint, do you think the NFL looks at players like Trubisky and Trey Lance and say that's moldable? I can teach them everything they need to know when they get to the NFL level, or maybe they value that over the Bo Nixes of the world who have been around forever and are maybe more of a finished product. How do you think NFL teams weigh those two situations?
I think first and foremost, like, no two teams look at it the same way, right? And I think we see that every year. Why some teams have QB X as their number one guy, and the other guy, has that guy lower on their list and has a completely different guy, because all these guys will look at it differently. Yeah, I think if you have confidence in your offensive staff, your head coach maybe is a guy who has a reputation for being able to develop the quarterback, I think teams like that will say, hey, look at what Trey Lance has from a trait standpoint. I'm going to be able to mold that, make him into the things I need him to do better, because I can't teach those other four things that he just can do because of his physical ability, right? I think that's what the Colts did with Anthony Richardson last year, right? I think, guys that value Malik Willis and Justin Fields and Trey Lance, that crop of quarterbacks highly, were guys that looked at it that way, for sure. But the other way to look at a guy who has the experience playing in the league for a long time is like, why didn't he come out, or like why wasn't he talented enough to come out earlier? That's kind of the knock way of looking at it. And I think there's something to be said for that as well, right? Like, if a guy is still in the league for his fifth and sixth year, well, that's because they weren't projected after their junior year to have a reasonable shot at getting drafted high enough. And so that's why you do go back and you try to prove more. And, some guys like Kenny Pickett, and they have this monster year, right? Dayton Daniels had this monster year. Bo Nix, I would put those last 2 years together, but certainly put his best foot forward. So I think it works out that way. But yeah, I think it's fair to say, like, the reason Caleb Williams and some of his other quarterbacks are out seemingly as quickly as they can, Trevor Lawrence, right, is because they're so talented that they earned that opportunity.
It's a great point. And we have other questions, but I do want to follow up one more on this, because it's
Please.
very it's interesting to me. I want to ask you about quarterback coach autonomy within an offense, within the structure and the rules of an offense. So the reason I'm asking you this is, we just watched a Giants season on tape where there were three different quarterbacks: Tyrod Taylor, Daniel Jones, and Tommy DeVito, all played snaps. And to us, both on tape, and this is also borne out in the stats. If you look at the outside the number throws, the throws down the field, and things of that nature, all three of them to me interpreted the offense completely differently. With Tyrod Taylor, you'd see just pre-snap reads, 3-step drop, hit your back foot and hit the slot vert or hit a vertical.
Yeah.
With Daniel Jones, you see a completely different process for reading the offense. And the same thing went for Tommy DeVito. Within an offensive structure, how much are the, like, from a rule standpoint, like, are the quarterback is the quarterback reading post snap the same way no matter who the quarterback is, or will a coach legitimately have it's kind of confusing. I'm confusing myself even asking the question, but you kind of know what I'm getting at there.
I do.
Yeah.
I think the better the coach, the more they'll adapt to the specific player they have.
Okay.
Right. And so you would expect that, Tyrod Taylor offense will look different than Daniel Jones offense. And hopefully it's because you're playing to not just their skill sets, but like what they're most comfortable doing.
Okay.
Right. And I think you see that a lot of years, like, when you see, especially when a starting quarterback goes down and now their backup goes in. I think we have also seen many examples where they're just trying to run the backup in the starting offense, and a lot of times it doesn't go very well, right? And to me, that's a lack of ability to adapt by an OC, and cater the offense a little bit better to a strength. So I think what you saw last year was actually a pretty interesting ability to adapt and find success. Because I think you could argue all three quarterbacks found some, maybe Daniel Jones the least, right? But with Tyrod and Tommy, they found some success, and which you don't normally see when you're talking QB2, QB3 having to play. So I think that was interesting, that they were able to change the offense slightly. But I think a lot of it is that might have been the same exact play call, and it's just Tyrod's ability as a 13-year veteran in the league. Maybe he's a little bit more willing to take shots down the field because he feels like he can see the explosive play, where I think a guy like Tommy DeVito, you might find be a little bit more risk averse, not wanting to pull the trigger, just trying to eliminate the big mistake. Mm-hmm. So did I kind of answer your question?
Yeah, that was perfect.
I think you want to adapt. I think ideally it looks different with different QBs. But yeah, sometimes it's just a play style thing that makes the result different.
Okay, I want to ask you something that we've asked a lot on this podcast, and that was in the past we were asked to pinpoint traits that matter most to us in evaluating quarterbacks. So I want to give you the three that stood out to us in our order, and then you can give us like a grade on if those make your top three or what your top three would be.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So number one for us is pre and post snap processing. We group it together. Number two for us is arm talent, not arm strength. We're talking arm talent, the ability to change arm slot, trajectory on the football, pinpoint ball placement, and things of that nature. And then the third for us is pocket manipulation.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that pops in my head is how are you grading the first one? Like, how are you deciding how good someone's pre and post snap, right? Because you're right that if you look 10 years after a guy gets drafted and you said how successful was he in the NFL and what was the biggest reason why or why not, I would agree with you. It was probably his pre-post snap ability that dictated that. Question is, and we do this every year, these guys got a draft. How do I know? I don't know what they were coached. The biggest, my favorite's to knock on, like, oh, he's a one read and throw. Well, like, for all I know, that's what he was told to do by his OC. Right. Like, hey, you throw to Jimmy if he's open. If not, I want you to create. And so guys like, Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams have that ability to create. That's probably not a bad plan B, right? Malik Willis, when he was at Liberty, right? Like, there was not a lot of talent surrounding him. You could argue Malik pretty much every Saturday was the best player on the field in the games they played. Malik not seeing one and then just go make a play with your feet outside, that's probably, like for Hugh Freeze, that's like a pretty good option, right?
Right.
So that's an interesting one, right? But I agree. I think that's the biggest thing. It's just how do you evaluate that is tough. But so that combined with like a decision making, does he protect the football? I think you look a lot at like if we're watching the all 22 together, I might not know exactly what he's being coached to do or exactly how he's supposed to be reading through a progression. But I think we can see, like, when a guy is open and it seems like the QB's eyes are there, does he pull the trigger or does he not? right? Is
Right.
there a reluctance to that? So that kind of plays into that. Because if he's not, then I question what's he not seeing? What's happening post snap that's causing him doubt? So yeah, I love your number one, and I would just like fold those pieces into it a little bit. Um, Arm talent, and I'm a QB trainer, coach, mechanics guy, so that's my wheelhouse for sure. Biggest thing that jumps out to me, you know, if I'm watching guys throw live, and like if any QB that I'd want to evaluate, or if I was in a position to draft a QB, I just want to go see him live, and I want to see him throw, and I would get the most value out of that. And to your point earlier, Nick, like maybe it's Trey Lance, and I just see the trait. Maybe it's not polished, but I see the pieces there, and I'm like, give me that guy because I can fix these two or three things, and then the high end piece. So, and I love how you differentiate like talent, not like Joe Milton who can throw it the
Right.
furthest, right? But like who can adapt in different situations, who can kind of quote unquote make all the throws, and then in the way the game's played now, off platform and out of
Yep.
structure. Guys who have the ability to do that are really the guys that elevate. It's the difference between the game manager and the guy that you win because of, right? And not to go back and forth and over on this, seems to be the most popular arguing point lately, but that's really the guy that has that adaptability, arm talent, off structure, off platform. Those are the guys that find two or three more wings in a season, in my opinion. And then yeah, I think the last piece, I love how you're obviously I know you're a QB guy. You study this stuff because you're not talking about pocket presence. You're talking about pocket manipulation, right? Like how to move, how to create some extra time, how to help out your offensive line, right? Things of that nature.
Yes.
And just how not to take bad sacks, right? I think those things all play together. And you could say, some guys will argue like, hey, we'll take a sack. It's better than forcing a bad throw. It's better than an interception, a bad turnover. Of course it is. But the way those negative plays add up, and, I don't have the data in front of me, but I would bet that the data on a drive that you take a sack on your ability to still get a first down, I got to imagine those numbers drop, pretty severely because of that lost bad negative play.
I mean, it's a good estimation by you. Sorry, you can get to it in a second, Nick. I just want to confirm what Sean said, because that's why one of the biggest stats that's circulating right now is pressure to sack percentage, pressure to sack rate, because of what you just said. They're looking at it, and when you're taking these sacks on drives, you're killing your team's chances of moving the football.
What's going on, Big Blue Banter listeners? I'm excited for the football season for several reasons. And one of those reasons is Prize Picks, which is North America's largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform. And it's so simple to use. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including professionals, sharks, and people who are going to exploit you, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you just watch the winnings roll in. It's very simple to play and gives you a little extra skin. I've set my picks in less than 60 seconds. There are so many stats to choose from, and the withdrawals of funds are easy and quick. Dan and I will be adding a segment to our show before every game where we pick our favorite stats, more or less yards or touchdowns, what have you, and we'll be discussing why from a scheme, matchup, and game theory perspective. I love their promotions and how easy their interface is to operate at Prize Picks. I may select more on tackles for a loss from Bobby Okereke or Kayvon Thibodeau next game. They also do other sports as well. It's a really cool experience. Please join Dan and I in the fun of Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/banter and use code BANTER for a first deposit match up to $100. You will not regret it. You ever feel sluggish or out of focus? Are you stressed? Has your digestive system caused discomfort or flatulence like a certain co-host on this podcast during a live stream? If so, you should check out AG1. When I started drinking AG1 daily, I could feel a real difference in my daily health. I had more energy, I was better off at the gym, and I could focus on my work in a much more efficient manner. That's because AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that supports your body's universal needs like gut optimization, stress management, and immune support. Since 2010, AG1 has led the future of foundational nutrition, continuously refining their formula to create a smarter, better way to elevate your baseline health. Not only did I replace my multivitamin with AG1, but I love that every scoop also includes prebiotics, probiotics, and digestive enzymes for gut support. I recommend AG1 to all my family and friends because AG1 has a team of doctors and scientists that formulate around the latest science and maintains high quality standards within the industry. Even my friends have started drinking AG1, and they always tell me how energetic they feel and how it's helped them out at the gym, and also it's helped them manage their stress levels. That's why we're happy to have AG1 as our partner. If you want to take ownership of your health, it starts with AG1. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs when you first subscribe. Go to drinkag1.com/banter. That's drinkag1.com/banter to check it out. Our mental and physical well-being is of the utmost importance. Whether you're a world-class athlete or a podcaster like me, we all need to take that very seriously. That's why I'm excited that Unified Healing is sponsoring this episode of the Big Blue Banter podcast. Unified Healing is a new and super innovative global network of wellness centers powered by Energy Enhancement System, or EE System. If you haven't heard of the EE System yet, you'll want to listen up. This technology promotes wellness, deep relaxation, purification, and rejuvenation. Whether you're here in New York, New Jersey, Arizona, if you will, or hundreds of other locations across the globe, access to a center is easy and affordable. Interested in experiencing the EE System technology for yourself? Go to unifiedhealing.com/banter to learn more and find a center near you. That's UNIFYD healing.com/banter. No material or testimonials on the Unified Healing website are intended to be viewed as medical advice or a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified healthcare providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or treatment. And before undertaking a new healthcare regimen, include EE System.
Yeah, Sean, I want to focus on Drake May for a second because you brought up something interesting about not taking these drive-killing sacks, and I agree with you. I want to focus on Drake May, though, because Drake May, there are times where he is about to get sacked and he throws the football away, and there are defenders draped all over Drake May, and he completes the damn football. But then there are times where he does that same exact thing and he throws it directly to an underneath defender and it's an interception. So as a quarterback coach, how do you weigh the pros and cons to that specific situation with a player who can make magic when magic is not supposed to be made, but can also catastrophically kill your offensive drive by turning the football over?
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think it's the hardest fine line that there is at the position. It's a great question, and it's really the toughest thing to try to teach a young quarterback, and is to find that line of like, when does making the special big play become an issue? When does it hurt us more than it helps us, right? I think is the point you're getting to. And so with Drake, I think part of his ability to show that strength in the pocket and to hold on to the football even when pressure's coming late and still make a positive play, that's why people think of him as highly regarded as he is in this draft class, right? I think so. You don't want him to completely scrap that ability because that's part of what makes him special. And I think you can argue without that, he doesn't rise to the level of maybe some of the top QBs this draft class. On the flip side, we can't be turning the ball over every time. We can't be trying to Superman every play to the point where it hurts us as a team. So, the way I always look at it is, like not ever taking a sack, or really not ever turning the ball over can be easily achieved with the idea of you just, throw the ball away within 1 second every time you get a snap, right? Like it's an extreme. No one plays quarterback position that way. Whereas the other extreme is, I just hold the ball too long. I'm missing open receivers. I'm trying to do too much every play. And then when pressure comes, I just throw it up for grabs. That's the other extreme, right? And obviously, if you're too close to either one of those extremes, maybe you don't turn the ball over in the first example, but you certainly aren't working through progression. You aren't making plays when things break down. You aren't being able to extend the timeline to find open receivers later. So I'd argue that the guy who, if he doesn't see what he likes, immediately throws it away and, isn't any better than the guy who maybe tries to do too much and hold on too long on the back end. So it's finding that fine line. It's really trusting your quarterback. And this is the team that drafts Dre will need to do that, right? They'll need to say, okay, Drake, I love what you do. I want you to be special. This is why we drafted you. Go be Drake. And then also, let's understand better when the play's over. Let's be smart. Let's live to play another down. But I would push to that specialness more than I just don't want you to ever turn the ball over, because I don't think any quarterback, especially NFL, has success that way. Does that make sense?
It's
It does
very
make
relevant
sense.
to the New York Giants too, right, Dan? If we go back to the 2019, now I don't know how much of the specialness was necessarily there, but in New York Giants community, Daniel Jones in 2019, he made some really nice plays with his arm, but his big bugaboo, according to everyone, was that he was turning the football over and he was fumbling the football and he was throwing the football into precarious spots. And then when Jason Garrett was hired, I think maybe the coaching staff said, yeah, we need to limit those turnover worthy plays. And then we saw a more reserved Daniel Jones, which is now a 4 or 5 years later is a whole like argument on Twitter that's very contentious. Yeah. It's actually interesting.
It is always interesting, the nurture versus nature. But I thought something interesting you said about quarterback play, the fine line, and it's finding that fine line. And you'll appreciate this, Sean. A quick aside, and then we're going to want to get into some quarterback prospects in this class. But yeah, I once said on this podcast that I believe, and I can make a strong case that quarterback is the hardest job. That starting quarterback in the NFL is the hardest job in America. And people are like, "What the hell are you talking about?" And I was like, "Let me have a second here." Rocket surgeon, or whatever it would be, surgeon, rocket scientist.
Sure.
You could probably find 22, 25 great, amazing, consistently great rocket scientists. You probably can find 6 or 7 at this point NFL quarterbacks who are consistently great.
Yeah.
At most.
Yeah. It's honestly it's the most shocking, because I think you look at the league year in, year out and say, how are there not more? Like we're doing it this year. They're like, people want to project 6 guys as first round. If they're all first round, they're that and every
change
year
the
we're
league.
getting those. Yeah. Like what's happening at the net, and I think it's fair to question organizational structure and how you bring a young quarterback through, and how many opportunities you get them to develop, and all those, or how good is coaching. I think all those are fair questions to ask in the NFL, because it doesn't make sense. And like you said, any industry, how, there are only 5 or 6 consistent elite guys at that profession. But it's a good point. I like it.
It is how it is. And let's turn it over a little bit. Giants might be in the mix for a quarterback in this draft class. A lot of Giants fans want to just look at Brian Daboll and say, look, he's worked with a quarterback who had coachable, who had things that needed to be improved, but can be coached. And he worked with a quarterback who had things that you can't coach. So I want to ask you about coachable traits and non-coachable traits. I want to start with one that is pretty accepted in my mind as being non-coachable. Either have it or you don't. And that's arm talent. In my estimation of this draft class, I think there are 3 elite arm talents in this class, and I think 2 of them are a little bit above the third. For me, it's Caleb Williams, Drake May, and then I guess I could put Michael Penix there. But to me, he doesn't quite have the arm that the first 2 have from an arm talent standpoint. In your estimation of this class, I know you've seen him throw at the combine, you've seen some of the pro day stuff, and obviously you've watched some of the tape. Who do you think has elite level arm talent in this class?
So Caleb is, to me, different than the other.
Agreed on that too. Caleb's in his own tier,
right? So it's a whole different, and and I think of that. So we're talking arm talent, but just out of the gate, to me in this draft class, Caleb is a head and shoulders above everybody else for me, right? So I think of that first and foremost. And then when you start breaking down the specifics, and we'll start with arm talent, even that is at a completely different level than everybody below him. So that's the way I look at it. I think Drake is in that category for me. I would put Spencer Rattler in that category. Now, I don't know how far we're extending,
extend away,
because I think Spencer might be the 7th best guy in this draft class. So if we're going to count Spencer in these quarterbacks we're talking about, he would actually be a top 3 arm talent guy for me. I'd probably put him. I think Penix belongs in that group too. I think you got the right names, right? I would maybe extend it to Spencer as well. You know, what I think of when I think of those types of guys with special arm talent is obviously it's the way the ball kind of jumps out of their hand. Usually that's aided by an efficiency in their throwing motion and their mechanics that allow them to kind of get that extra velocity on the football and things of that nature. And we talked about the adaptability piece, which you see a lot more in a guy like Caleb or Spencer than I think you see in Drake or Penix, right? So it's like I like all four of them as the arm talent crew. I think Caleb and Spencer are like maybe more special arm talent, where Drake and Penix I see as like the kind of like big, you know, powerful kind of arm talent guys. Does that make sense if we if we make that differentiation? But from a thrower standpoint, from a guy that like, hey, he's going to come into the draft and has a chance to be a top 15, 20 arm talent guy in the league, then nobody outside of those four even are in the game, in my opinion.
Since we're talking about Spencer Rattler, can we actually start with him on the quarterback on with the 2024 quarterbacks and just give us some of the reasons why you believe his arm talent is up there with the other quarterbacks who are at the top of the draft?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you watch him throw, I think, you know, listen, there's think about Spencer Rattler 2 years ago was the next year he's the number one. Like when he can come out, right? Like we did it with Trevor, like hey, next year, Trevor, we've done it with Caleb. Like, you know, next year, Caleb, don't even worry about this because next year.
Arch Manning.
Yeah, right? Like, exactly. Well, Spencer was that guy. Like, you could argue there was like 2 years in a row where Spencer was going to be the number one guy that next year. And then obviously the play on the field wasn't at a level that allowed him to jump out, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, right? So, but the specialness you could always see with Spencer. So if you pop on his film, you know, I think about the highlight video thought process. Like if I just put like the Spencer Rattler highlight film on, that's a special highlight film, right? Caleb Williams is a special highlight film.
Right.
I don't know that the other guys have as special of a 10-play highlight film. It's his ability to make the tough throw, the forcing out of the pocket right, having to flip his hips, throw back left. You know, it's pressure on him where he has to change his arm angle and puts it like in the only spot you can put the football for a receiver to make that play. You know, those are special throws. It's why these guys, you could even say, get overrated every year. But you see these plays, and you're like, man, give me one of those guys, right? Especially if I'm a team, you know, who's maybe watched a lot of Eli Manning and then watched a lot of Daniel Jones, and maybe I haven't seen that in a while, right? I can't wait to maybe get one of those guys to see something different. I get that from a fan standpoint. So, no, obviously, Spencer's inconsistent. The play on the field year to year hasn't been good enough. He's turned the ball over. You know, he's made some questionable decisions. You know, there's reasons why I don't think to me, he's a day 3 guy, maybe. Probably end up going on day 2 because I think we're going to talk about all these guys going maybe a round at least higher than I think a lot of them should go. But if you ask me, like, Sean, who's the 5th round pick who's got a chance to actually be a guy 4 years, it's Spencer. You know, and to me, I think Spencer has more upside than even Bo Nix and Penix and some of those other guys who I know will get drafted much higher.
I love that take. I completely agree with that take. And I like that. I hate asking quarterbacks and quarterback coaches for sleepers at the quarterback position because quarterback is such a zero-sum game to me where there's no real such thing as a sleeper. There's so many of these guys aren't going to work out. I want something what you just said, somebody who you can get maybe in a later round who might have a chance to actually be that guy. For me, my only concerns with Spencer are his frame and his overall athleticism. These are just things that I'm not sure he's going to be able to get around, but it is what it is. He had the worst situation of any quarterback last year. They were pressured on 40% of his snaps, and he had 10 different offensive line combinations in 12 games, which is insane. I want to get to another quarterback, though, and get your eyes on another quarterback. It's a quarterback who's been linked to the Giants a lot. He may be on the board at 6, maybe not. Maybe now they have to trade up for him to 4 or 5, give up future assets. But it's JJ McCarthy, the young prospect out of Michigan. And I want to get your overall valuation, but I want to ask you a specific question that Nick and I have from watching his film. So when you watch JJ McCarthy, I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to see that right now he doesn't really have much like a change of pace. It's really just the fastball every time. And you could see it on the vertical shots. There's not a lot of trajectory. There's not a lot of touch. It's a fastball and he misses a lot. And then throwing to his left seems to be harder for him than throwing to his right. Those types of things, as far as can you get trajectory and touch on your deep ball? Can you start to improve throwing, make it look the same throwing left and right? What are your thoughts on that as a quarterback coach? Can that be taught? Can that be coached? Or is this something that also is more natural?
Yeah. So it can definitely be coached. It's going to be a combination of, is he around the people that are helping him and is he getting that coaching? And then is the quarterback willing to put the time and work in? Neither of those make me feel like JJ doesn't have that environment, right? And that, from all accounts, works really hard at his craft. So no reason to think that those things aren't there. We talked about earlier, it's a time. When you get to this point and now you're in the NFL, and my partner Quincy Avery with Quarterback Takeover talks about this all the time. Like, the NFL is not a developmental league. It's just not. It's not. So, we all can say, man, if Trey Lance had been given a little bit more time, look at what Jordan Love got to do.
Right.
Man, listen, Malik Willis is one of my guys that I've trained for years. Like, I want to see that with Malik. Malik's got high upside but that's not the way the league is. So that's the question you ask, is not, can it be fixed, but is it realistic to think it's going to get that much better, maybe in the amount of time you're going to give to evaluate that player? And that becomes the difficult part, right? Like, I don't think, JJ McCarthy during training camp or OTAs after he gets drafted is going to suddenly start putting better trajectory on his deep ball, right? Or I don't think he's going to suddenly work better at the top of the drop to get him more aligned to throw to his left side and get more consistency. To me, that becomes, hopefully it would have been a draft prep thing that he was working on.
Right.
We talked earlier about, I was tweeting during the combine and watching some guys throw. And to me, I was like, he's still struggling throwing to his left. And to me, you would have liked to see some more strides being done during draft prep. So now it feels like it's a next off-season thing for him. And then, so he's better at it year 2. Okay, but we're talking about a timeline that maybe you don't get that opportunity. So, yeah, it's all fixable. You just wish it had been fixed better at this point.
Maybe he should hire Quincy Avery and Sean McEvoy and get the quarterback coach.
I was halfway through my answer, and I'm like, this sounds like a very pathetic sell for him.
No.
And it certainly wasn't meant to be. I can't remember exactly who JJ works with, but the other thing in this industry is, like, I'm friendly with all of these guys, so I hope nothing comes across as disparaging to
I don't think
other guys in the industry. But yeah, I appreciate.
And he worked with Jim Harbaugh, so it's like,
right.
Sean, I want to ask you now about anticipatory throwing. So I just got done watching Drake May's tape, and there are certain throws over the middle of the field that I am wildly impressed with.
Yeah.
When it comes to him judging exactly where a seam receiver is going to be, he is uncorking the football right as that seam receiver is about to get to the linebacker. And he knows that if he throws with anticipation before that linebacker notices exactly what is going on as the safety is being occupied by another adjacent route, he understands that if I release football right now, it's going to get to where I need to be. And I feel like Drake May, and I have my issues with Drake May, but I think Drake May does a phenomenal job in this regard. So I want to first ask you, did you see that in Drake May's tape? And secondly, can you teach anticipatory passing? I know we already went over the innate question, but how difficult is that to have a quarterback recognize what a defense is doing and then attack said defense based on what they see?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's some of what we touched on is how aware is he of kind of how defenses work? Like, what structure of a defense in different coverages, if I'm seeing pre-snap, cover 6, do I then know what that means? Like, how the safety is going to go where and the linebacker to cover for him and things of that nature. Not to get overly technical, but my understanding
we
of
love it.
how they expect to move post snap, that is a piece of it. The second piece, and I think is the most overlooked, is understanding the timing of the route concept for a QB. And this is as simple as like your footwork being timed up, to each route in the progression. So if you're talking about throwing like a dig or a dagger route or a basic, depending on the depth and personnel of those, in breaking over the middle of the field routes, you're talking about that being a second progression throw, right? Because you have your quick hitter, your rhythm, whether it's it could be an aggressive like a bang eight or a seam route or a fade, some kind of alert look. But any route that's going to go past, 10 yards and have to break and come across the field obviously takes longer to develop. And so then by nature of a concept becomes a second route in the progression, right? We're on the same page there. So the quarterback then needs to make sure that when he works that play, he comes off of number one, resets his feet, and then is ready, loaded to pull the trigger. So being on time and being set to make the throw, Nick, is really what you're talking about. And I agree with you. That's really evident in what you see in Drake. The third piece is then you have to have the conviction to pull the trigger. So it's like a trust, a confidence. It's that, no, I know because of all that work I did this week in film, the way my coaches and I have been going through this playing, watching defenses, the way that I know that middle linebacker is lazy in his drop this week, right? Like all those things.
Yes.
So it's like I have to be prepared. One, I have to be on time and set to it. Two, my eyes in the right place. But then that third piece, like having the conviction, that's like a separator, right? Because we all have seen the guys who we talked about earlier. Like it looked like that was open. It looked like he was looking at it. Damn, why didn't he throw it?
Right.
Right. And I think Drake seems like a guy that, for better or worse, we talked about the turnovers earlier. For better or worse, he's got conviction and he's going to pull the trigger when he sees it. And I think that's harder to train into somebody.
I agree.
Than it is to maybe pull back slightly on a guy who does it too much. So I like that in Drake's game.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point how innate that is. And I think that's in JJ's game as well. And I think a lot of people mistake it in some ways still. I'll give an example from 2019. A lot of people felt like Daniel Jones had that trait and then somehow lost it over time. But I think if you really look at the tape from 2019, it was simply just it was a half field high-low system, and he was good at reading that. But once defenses and they played a lot of man coverage against Daniel Jones in 2019, they don't play man against him that much anymore. And once things changed, the situation changed around him, both in how NFL defenses play him, the tape they got to defend against him, things changed. And I think a lot of people feel like it was mostly the coaching that changed that. I don't personally blame the coaching as much as just the reality of NFL defenses getting film on you and taking away things that you did well.
That's right. I think that's right. I mean, like I said, I don't watch enough Giants film to break it down like you have. But yeah, the idea of, I agree. The defenses are going to see what a quarterback does well, and their whole game plan is to take that away.
Right.
So now it's just that constant back and forth, and maybe that's one of Daniel's limitations is to be able to fight back or you see it post snap and have the conviction to make the throw. So.
Sean, one more question on Drake May before we transition to somebody else. So one of my issues that I also had with him, because I am enamored with the ceiling of Drake May, but I do see some, and you can speak to this much better than I can, some issues with his footwork aligning to his target. I feel like there's just unnecessary steps sometimes, specifically with his front foot. And it's leading to a lot of these passes just kind of getting skipped into their target. Wild inaccuracies that when I first heard about it, before I watched the tape, I thought it was probably overpronounced. And I was like, oh no, that person who said that was actually quite accurate to use that term specifically. So Sean, can you just talk to our audience about what you see from Drake May's footwork and the accuracy issues that he did have at UNC?
Yeah, no, I think he is. He's kind of a freewheeling, freestyle type of quarterback. Okay, so that's a real thing for sure. You have to understand the framework and the environment he was in at North Carolina. So you remember what they were doing offensively. Phil Longo was there when he first got there. Phil Longo is the back pedal drop from under center guy, right? So people that are familiar with the way quarterbacks are trained and drops, Phil Longo kind of put his name on being the guy who all my quarterbacks back pedal because it helps them slightly throw better to their left. That's kind of his point.
Oh, interesting.
I don't like it. Like I never
Okay.
liked it as a drop. It's at best it's a workaround. So all right, so Dan, like you're a quarterback. You come to me for training. The first thing I want to do is get consistency in the way you throw, right? So I want to make all throws to the right feel the same as throws to the left. So we're talking about at the top of the drop, getting our hips and feet aligned to make those throws, right? And if I get perfectly aligned to the right and perfectly aligned to the left, then one shouldn't be better than the other, right? Like it's a common sense way to look at it. Well, that is something you have to work on, and that idea of getting, we call it turned at the top, going to the left, is not a natural skill, and it's kind of poorly taught at a lot of lower levels of football. So you have to get better at it, or you can create a workaround, right? You can say, "Oh, I'm not going to develop that in the quarterback. I'm not going to actually fix that. I'm just going to create a workaround to find another answer." To me, that's what the back pedal drop is. Does that make sense? Is that
it
you
does.
understanding?
It reminds me of like when I'm hitting my golf shots right and someone's like, just aim a little left. Like this is a workaround.
That's the idea, right? It's like, and quarterbacks do this all the time. Like, one of my friends, a good quarterback guy, talks about quarterbacks as being like these master compensators, right? And the more elite they are, the more like their ability to compensate over what could be like really bad mechanical flaws, like still allows them to be really successful, right? Does that make sense?
It's like Kentucky windage in shooting. It's Kentucky windage. If you don't BZO your rifle correctly, it's called Kentucky windage to try to just offset your shitty BZO to hit your target.
I'm going to take your word for it, but it sounds like we're on the right page. But so anyway, so part of the framework that Drake was brought into was this optimal, in my opinion, but at the very least like standard way of dropping, of working through offense, of throwing the football in some sense. So he found comfort and had success in that environment. So that's goes to the adaptability maybe of Drake. But it also makes sense on why now, a couple years later, and now he's had 3 different OCs come in, right? Longo was gone. Can't remember who was there last year. Chip Lindsey came in. Chip Lindsey was in there last year. I think when you watch the film from 2 years ago and the film from this year,
such a difference.
Yeah, and then some offensive concept stuff. I mean, Chip Lindsey was at Auburn. He was at Bo Nix. Actually, was there with Chip a little bit. Yes. So you watch Chip Lindsey. I don't think anyone's super impressed with him with who he does concept wise, and so you're seeing that on Drake. So to your point, Nick, let's not kill the guy, or like, how do I separate the things I see that I don't love versus like, is that his fault, or is he doing what he was coached to do? And then now it's back to how fixable is it, or how quickly can we fix it? And I mean, listen, if you want a guy, this is the problem. This is the whole pro ready.
Yeah.
This is why guys get drafted way earlier than they're supposed to, and then 3 years later, we're like, that guy wasn't really ever that good. You're like, yeah, no kidding, because he was like pro ready. Like, he might be better this first year. If he has to take snaps week 6 of his rookie year, he might be better. He might be better under center. He might have better footwork in his drops. But we know the high end talents, like people that are like shocked that Mac Jones never really, like, I think we kind of knew what Mac Jones's high like upside was, right? I think we did. That's why jumped at Zach Wilson or jumped at Trey Lance. Now, those might have all been bad decisions too. Justin Fields, right? Maybe none of those work out.
People are swinging for the fences.
Yeah, but like, don't draft the guy for a reason and then be surprised when he becomes the guy you thought he was. So to me, and this goes back to the Drake versus JJ McCarthy conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want? JJ, to me, he's going to be better dropping from under center. He's going to look cleaner in play action. His footwork's going to be slightly better. To me, Drake has way more high-end upside potential. Drake, to me, now, I probably have Jaden Daniels as like my number 2 guy.
Okay.
But Drake might be the highest upside after Caleb. Does that make sense? So if you if you do it that way.
It makes a ton of sense to me.
And for sure, teams are going to do that. Like, there's going to be a team that loves Drake and hates Jaden Daniels because of play style differences and what they want their offense to look like. And then there's going to be teams looking at exactly the other way, because of, the things Jaden can bring offensively. It's like last year's the perfect example, like Anthony Richardson. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if Anthony Richardson was the Colts and Shane Steichen's #1 QB on the draft board. But he wasn't a lot of other teams. They wouldn't have touched him with a pole because that style of play isn't what they want their offense to look like. Does that make sense? And I love Anthony Richardson. I love Anthony Richardson. But and not to say that Carolina should have or shouldn't have or whatever, but they weren't like that. Wasn't what they wanted. Right. And you see that throughout the draft every year. So that'll be the interesting when you talk about all four of those guys. You're going to have who's the high upside, who's the maybe more pro ready now, who fits my system better. And that's why the whole thing becomes so difficult to predict, not just where and when they'll get drafted,
who will work,
who's going to have success. Yeah, for sure.
It's so hard. I want to ask you something hard. I know you're giving us a lot of time already,
You're
Sean.
Good.
So
You're good.
Tons of your time. I want to take too much more, but I want to ask you something you brought up earlier, and it's a really great point. How the NFL is not a developmental league, and this really is true. And it comes to the offensive line and quarterbacks, especially. And yet, there was a quarterback who developed in such an insane way to me, really. And I'm wondering if he's an outlier, or if you have any insight to how it happened. And who deserves the credit for it? Is it his quarterback coach, Jordan Palmer, or is it his head coach or offensive coordinator at the time, Brian Dable? I don't know. I'm curious how it happened, but how did Josh Allen go from the quarterback I watched on tape at Wyoming to the quarterback he is now, from a mechanic standpoint, footwork standpoint, all of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's we talked about, like, all these things are fixable. It's like, what's his environment? Is he willing to put the time in? All those factors are together, and then the time aspect of allowing it to happen. So I think that I think Jordan Palmer does deserve a lot of credit for Josh Allen. There's a guy named Chris Hess who does a lot of biometric, kind of 3D video stuff. A lot of quarterbacks work with them. I've been around Chris a bunch as well. Josh Allen has really bought into what Chris brings to the table with being able to see his mechanics differently and understand how fixing this one thing mechanically translates to that. Josh owns a lot of his process as well, right? So I think JP will be the first one to tell you, like, Jordan will pat himself on the back, but he'll also tell you, like, Josh has his idea of what he wants to work on.
Gotcha.
And Jordan becomes a piece of that, just like Chris Hess becomes a piece of that, just like other guys surrounding him, in Buffalo become a piece of that, right?
Okay.
Josh is a guy. Josh is what you hope when you look at these high upside quarterbacks.
Right.
That's why every year somebody's compare. Oh, this is the Josh Allen of this year, right? And probably none of them will be. But it's like, what would happen if these guys actually 100% reach their potential, right? And Josh is the outlier on that so far. But I do think there's other guys on that trajectory. The question is the team going to, like, design a path for that to happen? I think Jalen Hurts is a good example of that, right? Like, Jalen Hurts is a much better player now than he was his senior year of college, his rookie year in the NFL. You saw, like, the constant trajectory of, like, oh, he's a more polished passer. He's getting more consistent, where early on it was just trying to make plays with his feet and win that way. But Jalen got the 2 to 3 to 4. I think Justin Fields was heading on that trajectory, right? Like, I think that was a guy that was getting closer to reaching his upside, and you saw some growth. But, like, if I'm Chicago and Caleb Williams is there, I get it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the question, is, like, are you going to be in this right environment where the team sees the growth that you're making and is willing to kind of ride out the early years? I think the Colts are going to have to do it with Anthony. I think the Colts drafted Anthony and said, listen, he might throw 25 interceptions year one. Year two, we might go 6-11. Year three, we might go, 8-8. But that's okay, because we know if what we can do together. And but no, it's I think it is. He's an outlier, but I don't think it's as rare as it feels like it is, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense. I want to ask you one more, and we can close out there. This is bringing back to something you said earlier. I remember you said Spencer Rattler to you may have high, and I agree with this, by the way, have higher upside to you than Bo Nix and Michael Penix, you said.
Yeah.
Now, not everyone is aligned with where we see that, Sean. A lot of people are much higher on Michael Penix specifically. Not as much Nix, but Michael Penix specifically.
Mm-hmm.
My issues with Penix are how his game that I watch at Washington will translate to the NFL level, because I just don't see defenses playing Penix in the college game. I don't see that a lot when I watch NFL tape. Yeah. What for you? Because it's like it's back and forth. Some people love Penix, some people are less, don't see as much upside. What for you maybe caps that upside and has you saying something like you said before with like having Rattler maybe having more upside and players like that?
Yeah, I mean, I like, it's the concerns with Penix, like you said. It is the translation in the NFL. I mean, obviously he had a lot of success with the talent surrounding him, playing the defenses that he played for the majority of his time there in the Pac-12, right? You're right. You're not going to see it at the NFL level. The not so much the age, but like the years on him, like the mileage, talk about the injuries specifically, things of that nature. That's always something that gives you concern for a quarterback going forward. I love him as a thrower. I thought he was the best guy at the combine from a pure throwing standpoint of the guys that threw. I think he has the ability to be really accurate. He's got big horsepower in his arm, like really rips that thing. So like I see even I think we all found out he's maybe a little bit more athletic than we thought he was, right? Yeah, but he doesn't play that way, right? So like
that's the problem with that.
So that's my thing. So like I don't think of him as like a guy whose legs help him at the next level, because that's not the way he plays. Regardless of how fast he is. So yeah, that's I think Penix can will have well planned offensive scheme that he'll be able to work the concept and put the ball where it needs to be. Like he'll execute the plan because he's a good enough thrower. I think he's one of the better intermediate throwers in the draft class. I just don't know how much extra he brings. Does that make sense? And
it does make sense as far as ceiling goes.
I think that's where you're at, is like, does that fit what you want to do? Like if you're San Francisco 49ers, you can win with Penix for sure. Right. But if you're a team that's going to, most of these teams are going to be drafting QBs this year, where you kind of need him to do a little bit more. But we probably don't have elite talent everywhere around him yet. That would be my concern with Penix. But to me, he's like, like I told you, I think Caleb Williams is head and shoulders different than everybody else. I have Jaden 2, Drake 3, but I see those guys lumped together. I'm not very high on McCarthy. Like to me, in a normal year, McCarthy is like a second. He's a Drew Lock. He's a Will Levis type guy. You know what I mean?
I don't want to take too much of your time, Sean, but maybe elevator pitch real quick. What concerns you the most about McCarthy, and why is he not in the range of having upside to be one of those guys?
Yeah, I don't see enough from McCarthy of the elite ability to do really anything on the field, right? So obviously, he's athletic, but he's not like elite talent. Like he's gonna rush for 300 yards or anything like that, even make plays with his speed. He doesn't add to the run game. So he's not that type so he's not elite in that aspect. I don't think he has elite arm strength. I actually think that's, a little bit of a failure for him, which is why I think he tries to drive lower trajectory, some of that deep ball. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Interesting. That makes a lot of
over
sense.
Horsepower.
Yeah.
It's why he struggles to the left, because he's tried to really pull and get power with that left side. And right. So there's not elite arm strength. There's not elite athleticism. I think you watch his film and you can see like an example of him doing all the throws in a pretty excellent way, but it's just so limited, right? Like I think you're finding 20 examples that you're like, okay, that's a big throw. We're like Caleb's like, got 6 a game. And I would argue Drake May's got like 4 of those a game. Right. And so just jumping out like that guy's elite. Now, like I said, I love Drew Lock. I like Drew Lock coming out as a draft prospect. I like Will Levis a ton, but I didn't think Will Levis was the first round pick last year when guys were pushing him earlier. Like, I think he got drafted probably where he should. But I like Will Levis better than I like definitely McCarthy and Penix and Nix. I kind of like Levis better than Drake sometimes. Does that make sense? So, like, it's weird for me to say I think Levis picked in the second round is where he should have been picked. And I also think he might be better than Drake May, right? So, like, that's the crazy thing.
It's the market for quarterbacks in the NFL.
And that's why anytime we have this conversation, like, I'll never predict where they get drafted or who goes. I'll just tell you, in my opinion, the order they should go. And the order might be Caleb 1 overall and the next guy in the third round, right?
Yeah.
Like, but we all know with this year specifically, the teams that need quarterbacks, it's not going to be that way.
One more quick question, Sean, just because we all on this podcast and basically everybody covering the draft understands that Caleb Williams is very, very good. Who was the last quarterback that had his type of talent coming out of the draft class? Would it be Trevor Lawrence? And if it is, who before Trevor?
Yeah, that's a great question. And because, kind of like, it's just like, is he generational type thing?
Yeah.
To me, it just goes back to Trevor. Like, it's not like, like trying to compare him to Andrew Luck or like whatever these like other guys. I don't see that at all. I think Caleb as a draft prospect was better to me than Bryce and CJ last year. Now, obviously CJ, I think outplayed all of our expectations. I mean, I told you, I love Caleb. I think he's head and shoulders better than everybody else in this draft class. I'm still probably lower on him than I would have. I'm a Bears fan and I work with Justin Fields. So there's bias, right? I was for the Bears sticking with Justin, like playing that out, seeing it. Now, I also understand all the reasons why you can't not take Caleb Williams and move on. But like, that's where, like, I was kind of, I don't know, right? Because I don't think Caleb's like a no doubt about it. I think Trevor was the best example lately, but I don't know that you're looking back now, you're like, Trevor was what we hoped or thought he was going to be. He wasn't as no doubt about it. Maybe now he looks good relative to the other guys in that draft class. Like, at least he still has a job, right? But yeah, like, so I had before Trevor, and I don't go back that far, right? Like 2019, that was the Daniel Jones draft. That was maybe 2018. That's about as far back as I remember, like, really being in the industry, starting to do some draft prep. We worked with Dwayne Haskins that year and did his draft prep. That was kind of where I was really felt like I could wrap my head around these different prospects. So I don't go back far enough to give you a good example of who was that before Trevor. And Trevor and Caleb, to me, don't compare at all.
Yeah.
It's like so different. Caleb's probably more special, but Trevor was just so polished.
Yes.
And like, I don't think anybody describes Caleb as being polished. So it's like so different to compare those two. Yeah. But it's like, no doubt about it, he's number one. You don't think twice about it. Trevor was the last one for me. Obviously, there was no one in 2022. And then last year, I just don't think, even CJ, the way he played, certainly coming out, wasn't that guy.
I love it. All right. That's Sean McEvoy of Quarterback Takeover, QBTakeover.com. Honestly, Sean, I could talk. I'm so happy you gave us all this time. I don't want to press you any more time. You're already giving us so much. I think I could talk quarterback play with you for 3 hours straight. And we didn't even get a chance to ask you about Daniel Jones, and it's okay. We're past that point at this stage.
It'll be real. I'm excited. I'm really interested to see what they do. I think if it wasn't for the injury part of Daniel, you might look at him differently. With the injuries, that might be if it was on the fence, this question of how healthy is he going to be when he comes back, to me, that you have to draft a QB. That's where I'm at. Right. But it'll be interesting. Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. After they draft and they figure it out, let's talk again as we get closer to the season, and we'll hammer some of that stuff out.
I love it.
Thank you so much,
again, Sean. And again, you can find Quarterback Takeover, QBTakeover.com. And if you are a young quarterback who wants to work with Sean can help you get your game to the next level. I know we have some people who either email or DM into Nick about this kind of stuff. So take a look, QBTakeover.com, and you'll find Sean there. Thanks again, Sean.
Appreciate you
Link
guys.
is in the link is in the description on YouTube and on the podcast.
There you go.
Thanks, fellas.